Welcome, everyone. Nice to see you. It's a nice thing to be in the temple together. I'm really thrilled, actually. So, as we begin, we're just feeling the time. People are coming on, so I'll ring a bell just for a bit and we'll just feel the time, eh? So here we are, just what's it like to be here? What's it like to be us? What's it like to be you? That's the Zen question. What is it like to be here? And what's our task in being here? Fairly good chance our task in being here is being here. Being is our task. The phrase in my mind, the koan Zen phrase in my mind at the moment is the universe is in a teacup. The universe is in a tea bowl. So the sort of lunatic things you find written on a temple wall. And this is one of the sub-temples of Daitokuji. And I thought, that's helpful. There's all this good advice, but the universe is in a teacup. It really transforms consciousness in a different way. So, that's what we have today. So just feeling the time, feeling what it is to be you, which is to say what it is to be Buddha. I've been away for a few weeks, as most of you know. And when we came back, the roses had invaded the garden. So it's all roses all the time. And a few remaining irises, one of which is on my altar. But it's kind of marvelous, really. And after being with, in the very austere, I don't know, austere is quite the right word, but the Zen gardens of Kyoto, where everything in a way is towards serenity and eternity. Sort of interesting, it's kind of fun to come back and have color, explosions, chaos. There we are. That's the ancient sound of the temple bell. So just feeling the time, feeling your life. When the great Chinese poet Du Fu was, there was a rebellion and it actually tore China apart. Arguably, it hasn't recovered since. But in the 800s, and he was captured and more or less held hostage in the city of the great capital city, which was then ruined by the war. And he started his great poem about that. His famous poem, which started with "Feeling the Time." We actually started with "The nation has perished, mountains and rivers remain." But feeling the time comes next. Feeling the time. So whatever our time is, feeling it. It's us. It's ours. We have it. Just to have our time. What is it to be you? What is no one else has a feeling of the flavor of your psyche and the magnificence of awareness and consciousness. Old Zhao Zhou was asked, well, what if it's a disaster? And he said, that's it too. What if you're running for a bus or a train? That's it too. Yeah. That's it too. Your consciousness is always here. There's something to have. So when we say have your life, we're having the vastness of it all. As the koan says, the universe is in a tea bowl. It's good to know about. We're carrying it around. Carrying it around. So I have that feeling of I don't have it yet, but summer is a kumen in, as Chaucer said, and I have a feeling that spring is departing, and in fact some of the songbirds have already gone to Alaska for their summer mating season, nesting season, and so our garden is much quieter when we came back, which is a sign of spring departing, but the spring flowers are still here. The old haiku that goes, departing spring, birds cry out, tears in the eyes of fish. And so the haiku were a great way that Zen people, got in a way, got to feel the seasons. Working in the field, the man who asked the way has disappeared. It's that dreamlike quality of just working in the garden. Someone asked the way, and they were fully there, and then they've gone. That dreamlike quality. So a bunch of us went to Kyoto, just a teacher's trip, and or a few of the, not all the teachers, a few of the teachers, and we just got back I just got back this week, and we just got back this week mainly, and it was very interesting, like just feeling Kyoto, feeling. One of my friends asked me, who goes to Kyoto a lot, said, well, why did you decide to go now? And I said, I don't know, it was just time to go. So that's how decisions get made, really. It was just time to go. Then I called one of the other teachers and said, I think we should go to Kyoto. And I got a message back saying, let's go to Kyoto. So that was the extent of the decision-making process. And a whole lot of us signed on, and it's seeing the old temples. And one of the nice things about the temples is that the gardens are, as I said, they're set up for meditation. They're set up for transformation, and so it's full of sayings like, this is the Buddha, and then actually that I made an error in my note about this meeting, but that's a temple in Arashiyama called Tenmyuji, that the gardens are the great thing. The temple itself is sort of not a great thing actually, but the gardens are wonderful, and there's a sign that says, to the track leading out into the mountains, go into nature and meet the Buddha. There's some other wonderful thing, that the Buddha is there, not just in your heart or in people you're looking at now, but in the trees and the birds, and the uguisu, which is the warbler who was singing its heart out while we were there. And this is you should be saying this. This is Sanju Sangendo, which is it's 1,000 Kuan Yins, actually, canons, Avalokiteshvaras, and there are other people as well, like various other deities, but it's an impressive number of an overwhelming number of divine beings in one very long hall. And And we were staying right next to it, and so we'd nip over before the tourists got in. But the tourists would get in. The best days were rainy ones, but there'd be a busload of tourists would turn up who were, it was just on their list. They had no particular feel for temples, but it was a sort of splendid thing for the guide to take them to see. And you'd hear amazingly foolish things from the guides, but it was sort of part of the fun, really. And as you walk through, and then it was a nice, if you didn't get distracted by people running through, then there would be waves, and then there'd be silence, and there wouldn't be anybody there for a while, and then you'd just be here with the great field of this temple. And it's like most of the figures date from the 1200s, and it was burned. Everything in Japan burned. Sometimes it was burned, and then about 168, I heard, I think, of the Buddhas remained, and then some master sculptors worked together to restore it in a decade or so, and so it was a great thing, and I've never seen this temple before, but I'd been exposed to it a lot, and people who are great advocates of it, and it was like everything else in Japan, it's sort of fallen into disrepair after the war and Second War, and there was a master sculptor who wanted to become an artist, and somebody told him that you'll just starve to death as an artist, but why don't you become a priest, and then people will pay you to do art. And so he did, and then he got a temple. We visited his temple, actually. And he got a temple and made sculpture, but he restored a lot of this stuff. So yeah. And so it's one of those great old sacred sites that you get in every culture, But I liked it. It was very moving to me, and I feel genuinely, and some of the gardens too, that it genuinely transforms your mind when you're exposed to it, and I think that's the idea of sacred architecture, so it transforms you. And there's as you I'm sure when you travel, there's a dreamlike quality, particularly if you travel in a place you don't go very often, and the nice thing about Japan is that I don't speak Japanese, and mainly I can't read just some Chinese a little bit, but some characters and stuff. But all the signs are incomprehensible, and often incomprehensible with Japanese people if we ask them. So that was kind of fun, and so we're really moving about in the mystery, and so the whole thing became. When you're doing that, it's either alarming or fun. Yun Men said, you make your way by daylight, you make things out by daylight, but what if there's no sun, no moon, no light? How will you find something to get hold of? And it was like that. And one of the first things I did was lose my wallet on about the second day I was there. And I got out of a cab, and my wallet got out with me, but then it wasn't with me 5 minutes later or something, and we weren't sure where it was, and so this was kind of fun. I left the whole thing alone for a while. Then later in the day, I called up the local police station, but you had to go in. They wouldn't talk to you unless you went in. And talking in English was hard for them anyway, which, they were doing a better job than I was in Japanese. But so we went in, and it was just like a movie set, and incredibly polite people, incredibly clean police station, and there were little dolls with Kyoto police, little just like straight out of a a Japanese cute thing. Like they weren't Hello Kitty, but they were in that direction, and the little dolls there saying Kyoto Police, and some of them had masks on to illustrate they should be wearing masks and things like that. And others of them didn't. It was very touching and amusing, and so they came up and wanted me to write my name and write what I'd lost, and then they went away and took it down the back and said, "You go sit there," and we sat in chairs and then I heard this voice come from the back, John Tarrant, John Tarrant, and so I knew they'd got a hit on on their computer, and so anyway, then we kept filling out forms, and then we'd fill the same form out again, and then again, and then again. So it was like definitely a culture that, not quite like the ancient British bureaucracy in India, but it's a culture that took bureaucracy seriously, and so then they come up and they're very excited about it, and I'm the only person they're dealing with, and there's like 3 guys and 1 woman who's doing most of the translating, and it's very amiable and friendly, and then they point on a map where to go, and then I realized that's not going to be very helpful to me. So they say, "Are you going by bus or by cab?" And so I said, "I think I better get a cab." And so they write out, "Show this to the cab driver." And the cab driver was very friendly. And as soon as we showed it to him, he stopped talking to us. And we realized it's because we were going to a sub-police station. He didn't know why we were going. Didn't want to have more involvement with us. And then when we went into the sub-police station, which was it was much more like you expect a police station to be, which, wanted posters on the wall, and the cop was like a big burly tough guy with one of those vests that's got stuff hanging off it all the time, and he'd been watching American movies, I think, and anyway, he was, and there was a rather attractive woman in there, sort of making a case for something to a woman, police person. I never knew what that was about, but the police were trying to help her and stuff. So it was that in the middle of life, and then he comes back with I just have a card case, really, not a proper wallet, and he comes back with it, and I look at it, and then he takes out my license and looks at me, and and he said, "Oh, very good." And then he gets out a translation thing and he speaks into it and shows me. He says, "So Japanese people are kind, yes?" And so he wanted me to appreciate how remarkable it was in the middle of a busy city. I got my wallet back within a couple of hours. And I said, "Yes, very kind, very helpful, very people," and so that was kind of sweet. And then the next day I left my hat in a cab, and I thought, I'm not going back. I've got to sacrifice something to the gods of strange cities. and in fact, I didn't lose anything else for the rest of the time, so that was good. So the beauty of the interesting quality about Japan and the sort of thoughtfulness of the culture in that way, and you can tell the intense simmering undercurrents in that, but the temples were beautiful. You walk into there's a little temple where we spent some time in that you walk in and there's a big flat slab of stone and there's a sign saying Zazen stone. And so you think, okay, so you sit down on the stone and then you're immediately facing a very careful rock arrangement of this circle and then a little stone like a Buddha in the center, like an altar. And in fact, if you want to do Zazen at that temple, you can just sit there all afternoon, or you can go into the temple and do Zazen. So it was rather wonderful. And the famous rock gardens where, all the history of Daitokuji was burned down. Daitokuji had various disasters over its life, but it was burned several times. And great Ikkyu, the mad, drunken, brilliant poet, was also, he'd become a priest in order to, so that he had some remote claim. He was an illegitimate son of the emperor, and becoming a priest sort of kept him alive, so nobody thought he would be wanting to be emperor. So he didn't get killed. And so then he was the person who rebuilt it. You know, he called upon him to rebuild it. So it's a wonderful history for that kind of the place. And it was just nice being in that, you know, feeling the quality of it, sort of like different kinds of cathedrals, really. And then, and in fact, there's a garden there that the main founder of tea ceremony, well, Urasenke school of tea ceremony, Senno Rikyu, used to go and drink tea there all the time and be in the garden. And he annoyed the emperor by, he put some Buddha's figures over the great gate. The emperor had to pass under. The emperor thought one of the figures looked like Senno Rikyu, and even though he knew Senno Rikyu well, he ordered him to die, commit suicide so that we don't kill you. And because he thought one of the figures looked just too much like Senno Rikyu, and he was making the emperor walk underneath him, so he thought he was being smart and smart-assed, really. And so, and that's a tremendous story, because then one of the old arts of Japan is indigo dyeing. And indigo is this, in Japan, it's a plant, and people steep it, and they steep it like about 15 times, and they ferment it, and the dye eventually comes out. I'm wearing an indigo dyed thing. This is indigo dye. And it's very dark blue, indigo, in fact. And I was talking to this guy there, and his English was actually fairly good, but sort of wild, and he had this wild-eyed look, and he was saying how I am not an artist, I am a dyer, and he was sort of babbling, and we're in this shop of his, it was a very beautiful shop and amazing old fabrics and things, and so he said, you know, the emperor kills artists here. And I said, well, are you talking about Senno Rikyu? And then some sort of connection happened, and then Tess started talking to, Alison and Tess, maybe, I'm not sure who, started talking to his father, and his father was so it's a traditional thing handed down. His father was a printmaker as well as a dyer, and his father had terminal cancer, clearly, and his poignant situation was that he was kind of like a priest himself. He couldn't leave the family tradition. He couldn't leave, so he could never marry. He could never, and so we were thinking, he's a bit crazy, isn't he? And then we realized, oh, it's just maybe it's an appropriate reaction to his circumstances. He sort of seemed a wild person who does all this dyeing, and he said, I'm a dyer, not an artist, which meant to me that he couldn't leave he was constrained by the beauty of the tradition and the force of his family obligations, and he just couldn't move out of that, you know. And so that's the other side of the wonderful ancient traditions. The guy who restored, this is a thing by the guy who restored, that's a clockwise Indian swastika, their sun symbol. It's not the Japanese one. Sorry, the German one goes the other way. And this is his son's, not as good, but his son just does it as homage. His son's his son's a monk, and an incredibly sweet person, but at the weekends he does this crazy heavy rock and roll keyboard and guitar stuff. So he's working it out that way, you know. And yeah. So it's sort of just the interactions with tradition is when you're in a spiritual tradition, as I am, and I feel in some ways myself, all I wanted to do was find out what the world was about. And years ago, I went off to, I was living with a poet in Australia, assisting a poet, much older poet in Australia, and I asked her, well, what is it all about? And she said, you have to go to India for that. I wrote about that in Rhino. It was as if I'd asked her where the paper clips were, and she had an old IBM Selectric she was typing on, she said, "Oh, you have to go to India for that." And courage returned, kept typing, and, and I thought, oh, then I've got to travel, and so I ended up in Zen temples and things, and on the journey, it means a journey, and that's all I wanted, to find out how the world, what's it about, what are we here for, what's being, what's meaning, and I felt I'd gotten as far as I could with Western philosophy, and which is not nowhere, but it didn't. Something was missing for me, and then and so then I ended up, being asked to teach, and which was not. I was actually somewhat reluctant to teach because I thought, it's like the guy who was the indigo dyer, I thought this will consume me, and I thought, well, I can just have my life, and it'll be all right, I'm not very important, and my teacher's old and venerable, so all the everything. But then eventually, I would just end up to my neck, and as the other teachers who went with me to Kyoto, so this conspiracy gets worse, So it's sort of an interesting thing to see where it came from in Japan, and the Japanese definitely did something really interesting and different from the Indians, who Indians had no really interest in the art of anything. It was a very solitary kind of tradition, and abstemious in solitude. Whereas the Japanese felt that you could, and the Chinese too, felt like by collaboration you could deepen consciousness with other people through dialogue and through traveling to Kyoto together, things like that, and so and the arts of arts of gardening and the arts of work were important to both the Chinese and the Japanese. So one of the things that it came to me was how that's definitely the right tradition for me to be in, and the idea is not just to get free of suffering, which was the original Buddhist idea, but to bless the world and participate in the world and let the world, in a way, come to you and into you and have you, and rather than just thinking, well, what can I get out of it, or even more, what I can get out of it is getting free of it, which is the original Indian notion. But no, we participate, and with our hands we give gifts, and we make beauty, and people will, in centuries to come, if there are centuries to come, will experience that and be transformed themselves. So that I think what I'm saying is we're all in this together, and I thank you for being part of it. That's also when people were saying, well, you're looking forward to getting home? Because we were there for getting on for 3 weeks, Alison and I wanted to move very slowly, and I didn't want to be rushing around, so we just stayed in this one place. And everybody said, you're not going anywhere else? No, we're not going anywhere else, or at least I'm not. And it was great. And but one of the things I look forward to is doing Zazen with you. That was one of the things. That's home for me too. To do Zazen together. It opens the heart and allows us as best we can to bless others and all of that. So we'll sit for a bit, eh? And I like that thing about the universe is in a teacup. I said in the thing, I have a friend who was kind of, just going through a difficult spot, and she was telling me all about it, and I was saying these helpful things, well, don't blame yourself and don't blame the other person and stuff. And I thought, oh my God, this is terrible. I'm being helpful, I'm in the wrong way. I'm just giving advice, and everybody knows when you get advice, you go away and you try to do it, and then you come back and say, well, that was really helpful, but everything's still the same. Nothing changed. So then I said, the universe is in a tea bowl, And she said, well, that might be helpful. So, it's a window. It's not, I don't know. It's not, you don't have to keep the same kind of consciousness that got you into trouble. You can just step out of it. So that's what we're doing with Zazen. You know. This is the sound of the temple bell. Just letting the bell come through us, eh? You know. Feeling the time. You know, enjoying yourself's not such a bad thing. Which is what we do when we feel the time, even if, I don't know, even if we're in some sort of difficulty in our lives. Enjoy it. Just have this time. I noticed that I'm thinking about my father. His attention wasn't too bad when he was young and so on, but I noticed as he got older, he was just always had news or best sports on the telly, and every room in his house had a different soundscape. You walked through, there's a radio on one station, there was a telly on one channel, and in the kitchen there'd be a different channel for the telly, and you had all this noise going on, and it was clear to me that I don't know, seemed like he was trying to avoid something, you know, and or he didn't know how to be with himself, you know. But I noticed as he started to get sick, he stopped being interested in that, and his house was silent, or relatively silent. You know, he didn't have things like that going on, and he was, in a way, noticing his life, feeling his life, and then he was kind of much more fun to be with. Apart from the fact he wasn't, you know, listening to the equivalent of Fox News or something, but he was what, you know, he was an he became an interesting person. He was interested in death and what it was about, and life and what it was about, and you just feel his being and presence even if he couldn't talk, and I kind of liked that. So that's what Zazen is. We have the richness of being. Yeah, it's a nice thing to have the richness of being. So yeah. Enjoying ourselves here. Feeling life, feeling the time. letting the meditation come to us, and you'll notice that it just does, you know. And even if your mind's I don't know, if your mind's sort of running around over the hills all the time and kind of wild or just foggy or whatever it is your mind thinks it is, you notice if you just sit it, it clears itself. The universe is in a T-bowl. You don't have to understand that saying. You certainly don't have to make it make sense, but in some way it's healing. It gives us a greater perspective on the vastness that we're all part of. So just let it come to you and enjoy it, and in a way let this moment, we don't have another choice, right? We can fight the moment, we can use it, we can use the moment to avoid the moment, we can do all of the things we do, but something really nice about just being here and having it wash through us. And we do not have to improve ourselves. In my case, that was always hopeless anyway. But so I just have to do meditation in an unimproved state. The universe is in a tea bowl. Go out into nature, go out into music and see the Buddha, hear the Buddha. Any piece of the universe holds the universe. It's in your hands too. If you cup your hands, it's in your even if you don't cup your hands, it's there. Sitting together on a spring morning. It's a marvelous thing. A couple of people in the other hemispheres, sitting together in the afternoon, autumn. It's all the Buddha, the face of the Buddha. It's good to sit and let the universe wash through us, and after a while everything might start to feel empty, and free, and like the ocean, just flowing. I want to show you something else. This is a kanon, or a kanzeon, and you can see it's got a heart, and it's got there's a cross there, so it's clearly meant to do something to do with the war and peace. This was the guy who repaired the sculptures in Sanju Sangendo, and he has a bronze piece he did, and it was a piece, and it's on clouds, and so he had friends who were kamikaze pilots and died. Nobody really knows how they died, because a lot of them, flew their planes into ships, and some of them thought they were dying anyway, so they might as well just spare other people and flew their planes into the sea and other such things. And so this is Nishimura was his name. He this is the temple he founded, and when he it's kind of a funny thing, when he he decided, in order to become an artist, one of his friends said, well, you should become a priest. And he still got married and had kids and everything, but it focused his life really, and also gave people a way to fund him, and it's a touching story. But he was given this he was clearly an important person with a lot of initiative, and so the head of his lineage, which was, you don't hear about much here, but was Tendai, or heavenly, Tien, and is related to Shingon, or the esoteric lineage, which is like the Tibetans, and and he was given this ancient temple bits of it dating from the 700s, and statues and things that he had to restore the statues with, 1,000-arm Kannon with like 2 arms left, and then he cast other arms, and so you see this ancient figure with new bronze on some parts. It's really touching. Lots of new bronze, and then he thought, well, got to have people come around. I just have this beautiful ancient temple, and then I've recast the figures or repaired them, and so he got people to to he got a whole lot of volcanic rock, which is, he was a sculptor, which is easy to carve, although it doesn't last forever. And so he got all his friends, and some of them were artists, but a lot of them weren't, to just make. He'd said, well, what we need is 100 of the disciples of the Buddha, and so he got people to just make a figure. And so there are women with babies. There's a woman holding up a cat. There are two friends drinking sake together. They're all the disciples of the Buddha, and the whole yard. And he said they had to stop at about 500 because they didn't have any more stone left. They couldn't get any more of that stone, and it's there all. Yeah, all of it is there with and now it's covered with moss from the rains and things like that. But it gave an identity to the temple, having all the disciples of the Buddha, even though there were like over 500 of them, and they're holding skateboards or playing guitar or all these other sort of meditating, all these things. So it's a wonderful, creative way of entering the Dharma. So I want to bring some other people in. And Alison, do you have anything you want to say?
There we go. I was thinking about when we first got to Japan, and we were there by ourselves for a few days, and we were disoriented from, jet lag, but more than that, from everything about, well, we didn't speak the language and we couldn't read the signs, and even our guidebooks were inaccurate. Like everywhere you looked for some kind of way to orient, it was impossible. And I was thinking about the correspondence between uncertainty and intimacy, and how the time in Japan, just because I couldn't orient myself, everything was tremendously intimate, not through my good intentions, but simply because all of my ways of managing and controlling my experience were not available to me. And even with the food, so if I would think I would know what I was ordering, but sometimes you just had no idea. And even after I ate the thing, I had no idea. I had no idea if it was an animal or a vegetable or anything. And so that was just marvelous. And I couldn't form opinions so readily. And then I was also thinking about Senjo Sengendo, that the 1,000 deities. And the temple we were on the 3rd floor, our hotel room, and it looked down on the roof of the temple that held the 1,000 guanyins. And at 5:30 every morning, we would hear the sound of the temple bell, which we would leave our windows open at night just so that I could not miss the sound. And it just, pierced the heart, this 1,000-year-old bell ringing at dawn. And then we kept going back to the temple, as John said. And then our last time we went was, I think, the day before we left Kyoto. We waited until the very end of the day, thinking that there wouldn't be, many people there. They closed the gates at 4:30, but they make you leave the temple at 5. And so we thought we had 30 minutes of, being alone in the temple. And we got in there, and shortly after we got into the temple, this whole, maybe a whole busload or 2 busloads of tourists came, and there were hardly any Westerners, which was a huge relief to me. And but mainly the tourists were Japanese school children, so you'd see them, dressed in their in their very formal outfits, and they were really well behaved, unlike Western children who I know intimately. The teachers hardly had to look at them or reprimand them. And then hordes of Chinese tourists. And so we were waiting, and it'd be very easy for me, and I could feel my mind wanting to clear the tourists away. But then they just became part of the thousand Buddhas that were in the temple. And as we wandered slowly down, making our way, we were the very last people in the temple. And it got more and more still. And then at one point, a woman came in and she had a vacuum cleaner. She started vacuuming. I thought, oh, but even that, it fell into the sound of and the feeling of being in a temple, the vacuum cleaner in the temple. And then just as we were about to leave and that sound had stopped, she'd done her vacuuming, they rang the temple bell. And it was so loud from in there. You could feel it like moving through your body, the sound waves of it. And I suddenly felt what it must have been like. In fact, I was a monk 1,000 years ago, feeling the temple bell move through me. So that's the report.
Very good. And then they did the Heart Sutra, the Hanya Shingyo, it's ancient things, slightly different rhythm because they're Tendai and Shingo. It's kind of nice to see the other slightly different rhythms. Yeah. Tess, do you have anything to say?
So many things to say. You said something at the beginning about the blessings that felt like they were around, and something about what Allison just said really made me think more about that, and how in that particular temple they had giant candles that you could write something on that they would burn in the temple, and there'd be a whole row, and also sticks you could write on things you want to burn. And also you'd be walking around sometimes, and there'd be a whole little garden of Jizo statues as the protector of mother and children. And what you'd start to realize, even though you couldn't read, but you'd look a little closely, is that they were children who had died, who are somehow being honored in this little garden of statues. And I don't know, I was noticing just I guess I was noticing as we were there, what it was like to have the sacred and kind of those blessings woven into life in a way, which you might have like if you're in Rome or something, but in our particular culture, it's like, I don't know, you don't get them quite as obviously. So you start to, what I've almost started to notice as I've been back is seeing them in our culture, even though they seem a little disguised. Like yesterday I was driving, it's Memorial Day weekend, obviously, and this tree company had been hired to hang an enormous flag, and one of the flags next to it was the POW MIA flag. I never really noticed it before, but I had this moment. It was kind of in front of one of the big churches here. And I thought, in its own way, that's like the little Jizo statues, like it's an opportunity to somehow reflect for a moment or think for a moment. And so I guess I notice how I'm carrying some of those, like when you go to Bhutan and the prayer flags carry the prayers through the wind, it's like I'm carrying some of that blessing with me. And yeah, I could say more, but I want to hear from Michelle and John Joseph too, so that's all I'm going to say for now.
John.
Last couple nights I've had different dreams about our trip, and it's kind of really been nice to notice those few nights ago. I had a dream we were standing in this like gravel, this wide gravel courtyard on the edge of a temple, and it was our small traveling group, and we had our backpacks on backwards, so the backpack was in front rather than in back, and we were filling the backpacks with things that we would need for the day, like sunscreen and water bottle and hat and that sort of thing. And we filled the backpacks, and then they were full, and we were done, and it was sufficient. The backpack was completely sufficient for our journey. And the second dream last night was our small group was sort of standing around in the setting sun, in the gloaming of a late spring. It's a warm evening, and we were dressed in the silken kimonos of the summertime, the lighter kimonos of the summertime, and we were in sort of an old part of Kyoto where you have the tiled roofs and the white plastered walls and the exposed wood beams, and the sun was going down, and the lights of the town were coming up like a kind of like a hokusai print, and I could just feel the quality of the light and the warmth, and the temperature, and just all of us sort of enjoying the evening, ready to go perhaps to a restaurant or for a walk, and just this essential quality of life. It was really very nice.
Thank you, John. Michelle.
Just listening to you talk, especially Tess and John there, I started to feel like I could viscerally feel one of the things in Japan is you're constantly taking your shoes off and putting them on. And if you go into any temple, you know, you're walking around in stocking feet. And the feel of the floor in Sanjusan Gendo, the place with the 1,000 Buddhas, 1,000 canons, the scent of the incense. You know, I brought some of that incense back with me because the experience of being in that temple was so wonderful. And so I've been sitting here today with the scent of that temple, and then I can feel it in my feet, and I can see those candles, and it's just a wonderful thing. And then I think what I want to say, what was interesting to me, I came back from the trip and I really felt like I had been on a retreat. I felt like I'd been on a deep retreat, and I thought, what is that? Why do I feel that way? You know, was it the things we saw, what we encountered? Like, what is it? And I think that, you know, John was talking about his dad having Fox News and various things on all the time, and how that's a way of pushing the world away. And I noticed when I was in Kyoto, my tendency to want to listen to a book on tape or something like that while I'm doing something else, it was gone. I didn't have any pull to bring in anything else to create distance between me and my experience of being there. And there's something about being in a strange place where it's so my expectations of what I should be doing and what should be happening just fall away much more easily, kind of like being in a retreat. And so everything, it becomes really apparent how whatever I need to do in that moment, whatever needs to happen, it's just appearing right there. And that was, I don't know, that was really, really lovely. And having the ancient things interwoven with what was alive right now was also really, um, really touching. Um, and so I want to tell really quickly a story. One day, David Weinstein and Allison and I decided to go visit another Kanon temple called Kiyomizu-dera. And you can get there early in the morning, maybe ahead of some of these tourists. And so we went there early in the morning. We were walking around and looking at the temple and walking and avoiding the supposedly rabid monkeys that might attack us. There was a big sign saying, "Don't go here because the monkeys will attack you." We went through the gate anyway, but we didn't see any of them. But we met some people who we thought might tell us where we needed to go, because we thought we were lost, and it turned out they were more lost than we were. Luckily, David could speak to them a little bit since he speaks a little Japanese. So anyway, we were wandering all about, and then we got back to the main part of the temple, and these buses of Japanese school children that Allison described that were just absolutely everywhere. There's like 2 weeks a year that they come to Kyoto to learn about their history and the history of Japan. And they were just everywhere and cute as anything, but truly everywhere. And so you get this sense of like waves of them coming at you. And so Allison and David and I thought, let's go behind this temple where maybe there'll be like not so many people. And we walked behind this main temple, and we found a little grotto with a Kuan Yin, and it said, "This is the wet Kuan Yin," and there was some sort of sacred water that you could pour over the head of the Kuan Yin, and Allison did that. And then there was a man who walked up, and then he was sort of showing us, well, this is how you do it, you know. And then it turned out he was a teacher of middle school kids, and he had a group of about 5 of them with him, and little boys. And so he was there, and then it became clear they didn't really want to leave us. And then they said, "We want to interview you. We want to interview you." And they had these questions in English, and they asked them of us. And there is something just so amazing about the intertwining of this ancient temple and these ancient, incredibly manicured, beautiful forests, and then the aliveness of the right now and meeting the people right now who continue to live in that. And we took a picture with them for them. And anyway, it was all of that. It was beautiful. So thanks.
Thank you. That's great. We want to interview you. Yes. So yeah, and this is from the temple I spoke about, where they did all the sculptures of the Buddha's disciples, and they're all in rows. And this one touched me because it's a woman who's got a delightful relationship with her cat. and you see she's holding her cat, and the cat's standing up and showing its belly to us. And as I said, there are others of people meditating and people, you know, sharing sake with friends and guitars and things like that. There's a skateboard one. And so there's something tremendously free about the way this great sculptor and priest decided to, you know, reanimate the temple that was, you know, was being abandoned, really. And apart from making the sculptures for it, he got other people to make. The whole community got in it with making these. And he was a good enough sculptor. This was made by some amateur. It wasn't. It was just somebody. It was one of us made it. So, and they're pretty happy. The disciples of the Buddha. So I just wanted to show you that. And we'll just sit for a couple more minutes. The universe is in a teacup. A tea. It's very Lewis Carroll, really, the dormouse being put in the teapot. But the universe is in a tea bowl. The 100 disciples of the Buddha are in a tea bowl. All your hopes and dreams, everything you love and everything that's made you sad, they're all in the tea bowl. So I think the only conclusion is for us to have it and love it and enjoy it and not find fault with our lives, not find fault with what we want. Just keep sitting for a minute. Tess wants me to get something. Tess reminded me that I rescued an orphan tea bowl during the trip. And there was a place that associated with a temple that made and sold tea bowls, and they come with the maker's name and all the owners' names and history and everything, but in the original box. But this one had been lost, and nobody knew who'd made it. Although there's a, very distinctive style and a signature on it, but nobody understands what the signature is anymore. So there, and or who it pertains to. But so that's the universe, and this is the tea bowl is in this. The universe is in this. You're in this. Everyone is in this. Excuse me. So I suppose just before we go, I want to thank Jesse Carden for doing a couple of weeks for us while he's like consumed with making his house and his family and everything on the Big Island, and but nonetheless he held down the temple for us a couple of Sundays, which is very good. And thank you, Jesse. Well, we're cavorting among the temples and like cats in Kyoto.
It was wonderful. Nice to have you back.
Very good. Ah, I see you have a Buddha in a little interesting Buddha in your corner here. Very good. Okay, Amaryllis, can you take us away? However you're going to do that. Thank you, Jordan. It's good to see you, hear you. Thank you, everyone.